everybody, it's Emily at Arg Schooling, and today I'm going to be bringing you a video about my favorite historical fiction. I've had a few requests for this video, and so I thought, why not just pull some books from my shelves and talk about them. Today I've got 5 books that I'm going to show you that I would consider to be some of my favorite historical fiction I've ever read. So let's just get into it. First up, I have to talk about Philippa Gregory, naturally, but this is probably my favorite of her books, and this is The Queen's Fool. This story takes place during the reign of Queen Mary Tudor. It follows our main character, Hannah Green, who happens to be a Jewish girl living in this time period, which I was just so drawn to this story because of that. It's so rare to find books about Jewish people that take place outside of World War II, so that was great. And I loved Hannah's story about being different and other in Tudor England and how she dealt with that, and that she was the queen's fool because the queen needs a person to be honest to her face, when so many people are sycophants and they just want to curry favor with the queen. So it was great to see that perspective. I loved this book. It's fun to read. I love Philippa Gregory's writing and that it's very easy to read. Sometimes I feel like historical fiction, like fantasy, can get bogged down in details and facts. And I like that her books tend to be more in the almost gossipy kind of fun reading as opposed to the heavier fact-based stuff. Not that it's not factual. There's a lot of stuff in here that I would consider to be pretty historically accurate. She does go off the rails at times with her opinion about things, but I feel like these are really great fun to read. Next up, I want to talk about Azincourt by Bernard Cornwell. This was my very first Bernard Cornwell book I read, and I loved it. This takes place during the 100 Years' War, and it revolves around this main battle at Agincourt, and we're following an archer in the English army named Nicholas Hook and his adventures becoming an archer and fighting in the war. And it's very gritty, very it's dark. It's not a pretty picture of what that time was like. I think a lot of times we romanticize the Middle Ages into this time of beautiful dresses and political intrigue and all of that, when there was also some pretty gory battles, and it was not a pleasant time to live for the average person. So I feel like this story really gives you an in the moment feel for what it was like to be at war in this time period. I just found this book fascinating and gripping and really fun to read. Next, I have The Librarian of Auschwitz by Antonio Iturbe. I read this last year and I loved it. This was one of my favorite books I read last year, and it's so good. This is a true story about a girl named Dita Kraus who was in Auschwitz and became a librarian there. She was in what was known as the show camp. And it was basically a front camp that they would use to sort of show people who might come to check out the concentration camps that, see, we treat them well. We're not evil. We're not doing anything bad. We're keeping these people in a comfortable place. Because in this show camp, they had children there. The children had a school. They had slightly better conditions than the other part of Auschwitz. However, they were still not treated well. It was really all for show. And the people there were only allowed to stay in that camp for about 6 months before they were transitioned to the other Auschwitz, where they were basically transitioned straight to the gas chambers. And so Dita was in charge of keeping their illegal books that they were hiding in the camp. And they also had what was known as human books, which was basically a person who had stories to tell. So they would call on those people to come in and tell stories to the children. And it was such a moving story that this was a real person. This was her real story of what happened to her and her family. And it's so sad and stark, but also beautiful. And it just burrowed into my heart. I was so emotional reading this. And I loved also how he wove in other stories throughout this about other real people like Freddie Hirsch, and Anne Frank makes an appearance in here. It's such a beautiful, well done book, and I think it's one of those books that everyone should read, and yeah, it's important. Everyone should read this. Next up, I have Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden. I actually haven't read this in a very long time, and I've been wanting to do a reread. I just haven't had the chance yet. This is a story about a girl who became a geisha in Japan just before World War II. Follow her through her childhood and through her training to become a geisha, and right up through the war, where you see the Americans coming in and understanding what was happening in Japan and what a geisha was. And I loved this book. Well written. I remember just deep diving into wanting more stuff about Japan after I read this. But yeah, it's been like a decade. I need to pick this up again. Yeah, this is my motivation. I might try to fit this in at some point this year just so I can experience it again with fresh eyes and see if I still love it as much. And the last book I want to talk about is Ken Follett's The Pillars of the Earth. This book is a behemoth. It's so big, but I remember just loving this. This is another one I haven't read for a while, but I also watched the miniseries, and I feel like in my head I've intertwined those two stories, even though I know there's so many differences between them. But this book, basically, the premise sounds incredibly dull. It's following the building of a cathedral, which on its surface doesn't sound like a book you'd want to pick up. But please do. Don't let that be the thing that deters you, because the story is so much more than just building a cathedral. That is at the heart of what this book is about, but it's also about the people, the characters, the lives these people lived as the cathedral is being built. You're following several different characters throughout the story, from a lady of a noble birth to a simple builder and his family, church leaders who go from people who are really good to really, really awful. And one of the things that I loved about this book, and I'm pretty sure this is true of the rest of the ones in the series, though I haven't read them, but he does this great thing with bad guy characters. I love, one of the tropes that I really enjoy is when there's a really awful character, they are the worst human possible, and you get to see their comeuppance. I love that. I love when you get to see someone come crashing down. So he gives you characters that you really hate. You hate them. They're Umbridge level hate. And you get to see them fall hard, and it's great. So those are some of my favorite historical fiction reads. I might do another video at a later date where I talk about some young adult or children's historical fiction, but for today's video I just wanted to focus on the adult books that I've enjoyed. And so yeah, if you've enjoyed this video, please let me know. If you've read any of these books, we can chat about them. I'd love that. And if you have any historical fiction recommendations, leave them down below in the comments, and I will try to add them to my TBR unless I've already read them, in which case we can just talk together about how great they are. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video. Happy reading. Bye.